What's up guys, Rogue9 here, and by popular request our next loadout meta-analysis will focus on IQ's main weapons, the 5.52 Commando, the AUG A2 and the G8A1 machine gun. For me personally, the 5.52 was always the primary choice, primarily because the AUG takes up a huge amount of space on the screen to the point of being obstructive, and the G8 is an LMG, and as a class, the machine guns never really used to be viable. But are those assumptions still accurate as of Operation Wind Bastion? Let's crunch some stats and find out. Okay, I mentioned the outrageous silhouette of the AUG, and why not start there, because even though not stat related, having your vision obstructed by your gun model is nonetheless a significant drawback to consider. Since the launch of Rainbow Six Siege, the AUG has always stood out as a gun that sits incredibly high on the player's screen. As you can see here, the AUG with ACOG sight attached reaches 3/4 of the way up to the top of the screen, and then there's this butt-ugly huge charging handle that sticks out towards the center of the screen. Compare this to the 5.52 with ACOG or even an LMG like the G8, and you can see the difference. If you pick a smaller sight like the Reflex, the story remains much the same. I never understood why IQ decides to run around while holding her AUG up to her face as if she's wading through water up to her chin. Like, even when comparing the AUG A2 silhouette to the AUG A3 used by Kaed, we can see that this is only really an issue for IQ. So yeah, there you go. It's been 3 years since release of the game, and the AUG A2 still takes up a ridiculous amount of space on the screen, unlike any other gun in the game. But okay, it's not a complete deal breaker, I guess, and maybe it's just me who finds this particularly frustrating. Whatever the case, I am still going to call this a disadvantage for the AUG right off the bat, and if we take a brief look at the stats summary for all three of IQ's guns, things don't really get much better for the Austrian bullpup rifle. A quick glance is really all we need to see that both the 5.52 and G8 have advantages as well as drawbacks, but the stat summary shows that the AUG falls quite conclusively in the middle of the two other guns and doesn't really win out in any of the categories. So let's start our consideration for these guns out at the top. For each single shot, the 5.52 is the most powerful gun of the three, the AUG is pretty average compared to the rest of the assault rifles, and the gun with the largest caliber in real life, the G8, is actually super weak up close, although the long-range damage is actually pretty good. It is also worth mentioning that the damage drop-off for the LMGs in Rainbow Six bottoms out a little later at 40 meters instead of 35. How useful is this in a game where the average kill distance is below 10 meters? My guess would be that this mini advantage has no real impact for the G8 at all. But there you go, I've mentioned it for completeness sake. In terms of the fire rate, both the 5.52 and the AUG are below the assault rifle class average of 746.7 RPM, and this is where the G8 really shines. Combine the damage per shot and the rate of fire and we get the damage output per second against level 1 armor when all the shots hit the upper body. Up to 26 meters distance, the 5.52 is the winner in this category, while the G8 takes the top spot from 27 meters plus. The AUG is just a bit disappointing with its below average stats at all ranges, but in all fairness, it's not the weakest rifle in the game. In fact, amongst the assault rifles, the AUG ranks 17 out of 21 for raw damage output. Not great, but also not the worst. Max damage output is a useful little stat when comparing video game guns, but possibly more important are the shots to kill and time to kill. At close range, up to 25 meters, the 5.52 is powerful enough to take down most opponents in 3 shots, even with rook plates. Despite the lower damage, the AUG manages to keep up quite well at these ranges, but the G8 is left somewhat behind, requiring 1 or 2 extra shots against all combinations of armor and hit zones, apart from against level 1 armor body shots. The ranges at which these guns do their lowest damage are 3.5 to 4 times the average kill range of Siege, so these numbers are not really that important, but here they are anyway. As you can see, the 5.52 and G8 are pretty well matched, although the 5 meter extra damage drop-off distance provides the G8 with a minimal advantage, and the AUG is bringing up the rear. Time to down or kill up to 25 meters is pretty interesting though, since when comparing the 5.52 and AUG, the AUG actually has numbers that are just that tiny bit better than those of the 5.52 in most cases, except against level 2 armor leg or body shots with rook plates, and level 1 armor leg shots without rook plates. So in most cases the AUG is quicker, but in the cases where it will be slower, it will be quite a bit slower, so at the end of the day, I'm going to call both these guns pretty much equally viable in terms of the TTK. And the stats for the G8 are another interesting thing, since against level 1 armor up to 30 meters distance, the LMG actually posts the quickest time out of all 3 options. That is exactly the same time as Hibana's Type 89 and only 1 millisecond slower than Ash's R4C, so pretty damn good. But that is against level 1 armor body shots without rook plates only. After that, the G8's weak single shot damage means that you'll be looking at times to down or kill that are significantly below average. That just goes to show that you can't simply judge a book by its cover. The AUG may look weaker at first glance, but can definitely hold its own, and the G8 may have a huge fire rate advantage, but it is still too weak to really challenge the other two in most cases when landing body shots. Having said that though, the fire rate and large capacity of the G8 can definitely allow players to spray a very decent amount of lead down range, and in a game where a single headshot can end a firefight in an instant, this can work out to be a decent advantage after all. Reload times are pretty much as you would expect them, similar for the two rifles, although the AUG is a touch slower, and then quite a bit slower for the G8 to balance out the gun for its higher capacity. For aim down sight times, the two rifles come with the standard 450 milliseconds with the option of an angled grip on the 5.52, while the G8 has a significant disadvantage at 600 milliseconds. The angled grip can make the 5.52 the undisputed king in this category, but of course that is at the cost of 25% better recoil control offered by the vertical grip. And let's maybe look at recoil shortly, because that was again a pretty interesting factor. First, let me mention the hipfire and get it out of the way because it's quite boring. All guns have almost exactly the same hipfire spread diameter, literally 1 or 2 pixels difference, except for the G8 when moving. Here the spread becomes a little bit larger. So recoil, and again here things are quite interesting because the three guns are so different from each other. The 5.52 Commando has the harshest default recoil. I mean, look at the leftmost recoil pattern. The 5th shot in the burst isn't even shown anymore. But at the same time, the 5.52 is also the only one of IQ's primaries that can get the best possible vertical recoil reduction by attaching the muzzle brake and the vertical grip. Neither the AUG nor the G8 have access to the muzzle brake, which is very unusual, but at least the G8 can still attach the vertical grip, that is sort of mounted at an angle, but it's still a vertical grip, and the AUG is one of those rifles that comes with a pre-attached grip and can therefore not attach a separate one, but luckily the default recoil pattern is pretty decent to begin with. In theory, the G8 has the most controllable recoil, but the significantly faster fire rate actually increases the challenge to a point where the gun is manageable, but definitely requires a positive drawdown on the mouse to compensate for the climb. Despite the pretty evil-looking default recoil, the slow fire rate of the 5.52 basically achieves the opposite effect, making the gun very manageable with the vertical grip attached and still okay to shoot with the angled grip instead. But one thing that really surprised me was how easy the AUG was to control. I think what really helps is the lowish fire rate combined with the dead straight recoil and relatively small recoil diamond. After shooting the other two guns and then testing the AUG last, it really felt like a laser. One last thing before we wrap up. In the beginning, I talked about the first-person impact of the gun models, and in the case of IQ, I think it's also worth briefly mentioning the third-person impact. Both the 5.52 Commando and the AUG A2 are very compact rifles, but the G8A1 is much larger. In some occasional cases, when slowly moving through doorways or around corners, there is a small chance that the significant length of the G8 could give you away and basically allow your opponent a free pre-fire kill. With the two rifles, the chances of that happening are much smaller. Although to be fair, the chance of having the G8 length work against you in any given round is quite small, especially if you take care when approaching doorways and corners, but there is still a chance, so do take this into consideration. And those are pretty much all of the important stats, so how do we conclude? Let me start off with the G8A1 machine gun first. The weapon definitely has some strengths going for it. It is the most powerful of the 3 guns at long range, whatever that's worth in siege. It has the highest fire rate and a large capacity. The reload time isn't great, but for me the number one drawback has to be the slow ADS time. Not being able to react to sudden threats requires a much more methodical playstyle. You can't simply sprint in and wreck people, you need to make sure that you give yourself enough time to aim in before taking an engagement. Sure, we're only talking 150 milliseconds slower compared to the assault rifles, but in practice you'll feel the difference. The G8 is still a viable option if you're going to play IQ in a more supporting role. Hang back a bit, sniff out those Valk cams and traps, and then use the G8 to hold long angles and protect the flanks. In that kind of role, the G8 can be amazing, but if you're going to play IQ in a more aggressive manner, then either of the 2 assault rifles would probably be a better idea. For the rifles, let me get the AUG out of the way first, because on paper, the only thing this gun has going for it is the OK time to down or kill, and even here, it's only a few milliseconds better than the 5.52 in most cases. In the rest of the cases, it is actually significantly slower, and in addition to that, it still takes up a stupid amount of screen space. If there is one real saving grace for this weapon as it is currently modeled in Siege, it is its controllability. This gun really is a laser and probably one of the smoothest recoiling rifles you can find in the game, so if you want controllability, here it is. Other than that, the 5.52 probably offers you the better all-round package. With high power, decent damage output and TTK, and good reload, the only weakness of the 5.52 is the slow fire rate. Yes, the recoil is harsh, but the fire rate basically cancels that out to a point where I would say that, at least on PC, the angled grip is definitely a viable choice. If you want maximum controllability, bring the vertical grip for sure, but if you can take the added recoil, the lightning fast ADS of the angled grip can really seal the deal and make this gun the best choice for playing IQ in an aggressive manner. Those would pretty much be my conclusions on all 3 guns. What about you? Do you ever use the G8 or AUG at all? If so, what is it that you particularly like about these guns? Let me know in the comments section below. Also, feel free to let me know which guns you would like me to analyze next. I've seen a lot of requests for Jackal's guns, but also more and more calls for the P90 versus MP5. Those would be pretty interesting to examine, or I could do something completely different. It's up to you. And with that, thanks so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next episode.